Good morning and welcome to Seattle Atheist Church. Atheists, agnostics, skeptics, whatever you like to call yourself, you are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural promoted from the podium. Our church is founded on the principles of scientific naturalism and secular ethics. Truth claims are attempted here, and we stand ready to revise our thinking in light of new information. We attempt to be excellent to all conscious beings, and we believe in good because good works in non-mysterious ways. If that sounds right to you, then you are probably in the right place. So we're going to have a little conversation, and then after we have our conversation, I'll give a talk, and then afterwards we'll get into a circle and we'll have a little conversation. So that's how we do it here, and there's a planning meeting every 3 months. Everyone is welcome to come to the planning meeting, and the third Saturday of the month at Browers, we have a secular social where everyone is invited to come out and have a beer at Browers in Fremont. So before we get started, I just want to take care of an order of business, which is that if you would like to support the church financially, please, you can go to seattleatheist.church and make a donation. We don't have our donation jar today because our treasurer, who's usually here, is at Pride today. And thank you guys for coming today. Maybe in the future we'll make Pride like the event. I didn't realize that my talk fell on Pride, so thank you for being here. Okay, so today we are going to talk about peaceful communication. And the talk has 2 parts to it. The first part, we're going to focus on the work of Marshall Rosenberg. And during the second part, we will focus on the work of Zach Schwartz. Okay, when we think about nonviolent communication, so my talk is about peaceful communication, but how many of us have heard of nonviolent communication? Yeah, that's what I figured, quite a few. So that is, there was a book called Nonviolent Communication written by Michael Rosenberg, and he does trainings on that of the same name. So first I want to talk to you about the 4 steps of nonviolent communication, and then after I go over them, I'm going to apply them to an example that actually happened recently for clarity. So nonviolent communication has 4 steps. The first step is to observe the situation objectively. So this kind of forces you to be stay calm and be objective. Number 2, acknowledge how you are feeling in that moment. Number 3, connect how you are feeling to your values. And 4, make a request. So when I was getting a master's in family therapy, one of the things that we learned is that the easiest way to get someone to do something is to ask them. But most people cannot make a clean request that doesn't have a lot of drama, judgment, victimhood, anger, whatever attached to it. So if you can practice just making a clean request for what you need or want, you will have much better outcome of getting people to give you what you want. All right. So recently at the secular social, the last secular social we had, a guy showed up, and he was not a member of our church, but the events are open to the public, and he came to check it out. And he went up to some women and he started making some really inappropriate sexual comments. So I loved hearing how the women in our church dealt with this guy. And whether they were aware of it or not, when I reflected back on it, they actually used at least the first part of nonviolent communication. So, guy comes up, does the creepy thing in the bar, talking about his body parts and all that. So number 1, just observe the situation in the most objective sense. So the woman said, you know, we just met, and the first thing you say to me is a sexual comment. Number 2, acknowledge how it makes you feel. She said something like, that made me feel really uncomfortable, and frankly, I feel unsafe right now. I think she actually said, and frankly, I feel disgusted, which is valid. Number 3, connect your feelings to your values. So she said, I value feeling respected. And number 4, make a request. I'm going to ask that you keep comments like that to yourself. So that's what happened, and I just want to say, like, yay for having a strategy for dealing with it in just a really powerful way. Yes. Unfortunately, the guy didn't comply, but, you know, that's another story. All right. When doing formal nonviolent communication with a partner, you would also reflect back what you hear your partner saying. This makes it obvious that you are listening. And it also gives someone else a chance to just verify that you heard it correctly, right? Like sometimes we just mishear. And when I say back what I think you just said to me, you know, that happens to me with my husband sometimes, and it's just like, no, you misunderstood. All right, so now I want to, that's nonviolent communication, and I know that, you know, when we have our discussion, there's lots more we can talk about there, because really he does do, you know, workshops, complete workshops on that. But I want to also talk about the work of Zach Schwartz, because for me, this is the work about how you have the personal power to be able to set boundaries and you know, this is the work that makes it possible that when the thing happens, you don't kind of go into blah mode, but you just are able to deal with it from a position of power. So Zach Schwartz works with, his work has to do with nonviolent crisis intervention, and also he does couples counseling. His book called Changing Anger also covers something which is a lot like nonviolent communication, but which he calls reflective listening. So you reflect back the content that you heard your partner say to you. And then the second part of that is you reflect back what you believe your partner must be feeling. And so that's different from the nonviolent communication, because it's not the person saying, this is how I'm feeling, but it's you are practicing empathy with your partner and letting them know that you're thinking about how they're feeling. It also gets you thinking about how they're feeling, of course. So the point of reflecting back what your partner is feeling is to let your partner know that he or she is not alone in what they're feeling. So he says that in doing couples counseling, there are a couple of things that were pretty common. And the first which is that couples fight over which version of the story is the correct one. So if when you're talking, you get in the habit of using I language instead of you language, you know, what I experienced was, what I saw was, or even what I thought I saw was, you can eliminate that part of the fight where, you know, people are just fighting over whose version of the story is correct. I'm not saying there's not an objective version of the story. I'm saying at this moment we don't know what it is because we're both upset. So we just acknowledge that maybe your experience was different than my experience. The next thing is that people don't feel heard. So a lot of times during an argument, there's a lot of, you're not listening to me. And if you can calm down and if you can reflect back to the person what you heard them say, then that eliminates that you're not listening to me part. Okay, so then he goes on, there's a lot in this book. It's called Changing Anger is the book that I'm drawing from. But I want to talk about, he talks about your interpersonal rights. And you have 5 interpersonal rights. That's what he calls them, rights, that are necessary to have a healthy relationship. I call these interpersonal rights a System 1 organizing schema. So in the Kahneman and Tversky sense, this is your organizing schema that if you internalize these 5 rights, it will help you to have healthy boundaries. And then from a place of healthy boundaries, you'll be a lot more powerful and able to have your conversations. Okay, there are 5 of them. So the first of which is you have a right to safety. Second, you have a right to take space, which is another way of saying to take a time out or just to have time alone. 3, you have a right to self-care. So the right to time alone is like the right to self-care, but that includes a right to pursue your own interests, a right to have your own friendships, a right to have your own money, and many other things. But you have a right to take care of yourself and to put yourself, high, if not first on your to-do list. Number 4, you have the right to perception respect. I'll go into that a little more when I get to that. And number 5, you have a right to raise or have an issue. He calls it right to take issue. But if there's something that you want to talk about or something that's the way you feel, you have an issue with something, you have a right to have an issue. So the right to physical safety, this one should be obvious, but if you feel threatened or there's any slapping, pushing, somebody raising a fist, even if they don't actually hit you with it, full stop, not okay. And absolutely no communication can happen with someone if you are afraid of them. Can't happen in that moment, and it's doubtful that it could even happen at all unless you're doing something that's like mediated. Number 2, you have a right to take space. I call this just taking a time out. So in the middle of a conversation, if you feel that the conversation's gotten too heated, you can ask to just hit the pause button and to come back to it later. And you really shouldn't be in a conversation with someone who doesn't have enough self-control to be able to take a pause if things are getting too heated. You also have a right to be alone. You shouldn't be in a relationship with somebody who can't respect your desire to have some time to yourself when you choose to have some time to yourself. You have a right to self-care. And this means pursuing your own interests, having your own friends. And if you find yourself in a relationship with someone who's trying to control your interests or your friends, telling you what you should think, this person is not really interested in you. They are not interested in you as an independent person, and essentially they just want to use you, and you really are not going to be able to communicate with that person. You have a right to perception respect. This is probably the hardest one for people to understand. So 2 people do not need to share the same perspective or perception to be able to respect each other's perception. You can disagree, but if you care about somebody, you care enough about them to at least give them the space of like, I understand that that is how you see it. That's what you're thinking. And we can have a conversation about it, but there should absolutely never be any like labeling or shunning or any attempt to try to control somebody's thinking except for through reason, and most importantly, just to respect them enough to give them space to tell you even what it is from their perspective. So if your partner dismisses your perception as not even worth exploring, then he or she doesn't have enough respect for you to be able to really have communication. You have a right to raise an issue and have it discussed. So don't be in a relationship with someone who is not willing to have the conversation with you. Having a conversation does not mean that 2 people have to agree, but it does mean being able to reflect back to the other person that you heard what they said, and even to empathize with how they felt, to understand that's how that made you feel, okay? It's not my place to say it should not bother you, because it does bother you. And if you're clear on your rights, these things become your boundaries. And having strong boundaries makes you a more powerful communicator. If someone is not respecting your boundaries, then that isn't communication. That's coercion. So the focus of this talk today is somewhat on intimate personal relationships, because that's where, because I had to choose some place to focus. I'm going to open Pandora's box by also throwing out that I think this is true across the board. It's true with friends, it's true with coworkers, it's true with parents and children even. So all of that is worth exploring. But basically what we want to do is have communication with people that is free of coercion and free of fear. So what happens if we're out in the world and we're dealing with somebody and they're kind of scary and they're making us feel afraid, and we can't even get them to engage in any kind of rational way? Well, then you have every right to literally walk away from that conversation and say, I will meet you or someone like you, a member of your group, in a mediated situation if you are interested in pursuing this further. All right, let's discuss.